The federal government said it would soon revive the special terrorism prosecution courts. This, according to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami, will help to bring to book those found guilty of terrorism offences and serve as a deterrent to others. In a statement issued in Abuja on Thursday through his media aide, Dr. Umar Gwandu, the Attorney General noted that the move is a clear indication that the federal government is committed towards ending insecurity in the country. He added that the federal government has so far prosecuted 400 suspected Boko Haram financiers and has taken more measures to counter the twin troubles of insurgency and insecurity in the country. Now, a lawyer and public affairs analyst, Liborous Oshoma, joins us now to give us a perspective on this. Good morning, Barrister. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you.
All right, let's dive right into it. As a legal practitioner, are there any special terrorism courts in the country that can be revived by the federal government, while some analysts and legal practitioners like yourself beg to differ?
Presently, apart from the Anti-Terrorism Act of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, there is no special court created even by that act or the Constitution to try cases of terrorism. And so I also sometimes wonder which of the courts that Malami is talking about, except maybe they now want to, except maybe they want to amend the Constitution to establish a special terrorism court. But presently, looking at the Constitution and also the Anti-Terrorism Act, there is presently no law establishing special courts to try, terrorism. And so maybe, because I also listened to an interview where he granted and said that recently some Nigerians were convicted in the UAE and convicted for financing Boko Haram, and that the federal government was going to resume, investigation and the prosecution of anybody, with links to financing terrorism. Maybe he might just be referring to that interview he granted. But as to say that they want to revive courts, they have been known that, to the best of my knowledge and legally speaking, there are no courts in Nigeria. Right from independence, the Constitution has never really established any courts, especially to try cases of terrorism. And so, if you also remember, recently, there was this argument between the state governors and the Attorney General on who should prosecute people arrested for insecurity and all of that. And the federal government said, well, the state Attorney Generals are empowered by the Constitution to prosecute a crime of that nature. And so, against that backdrop, I think he would probably not be referring to creating special courts. We already have courts to try them anyway.
Well, I mean, in the already existing courts, I'd imagine that you'd be well aware that prosecuting terrorism comes with a unique set of legal and political challenges, such as cross-jurisdictional collaboration, the investigation, and of course prosecution. There's also the cause or risks of the erosion of civil liberties, such as the right to privacy, due process, and fairness when prosecuting alleged crimes of terrorism. When you look at all of this, can you identify what you think some of the biggest challenges are facing the criminal justice system here in Nigeria in balancing, what looks like a complex set of competing interests as it relates to terror and crime?
The first problem really is the willpower. That's the first obstacle. Like I always say, it is not lack of laws that's our problem, but lack of the willpower to prosecute. And like you rightly identified, prosecution starts from investigation. You investigate with a mindset to actually prosecute. And in investigating, there are ingredients that you're looking out for, that you know that the court will look out for, because by virtue of the Constitution, every person is presumed innocent. Even when you catch him red-handed, he's still presumed innocent until proven guilty or pronounced guilty by a competent court of law. And so against that backdrop, if you are investigating, you must have the mindset of prosecuting. And there are ingredients that must be proven in as provided for in the Anti-Terrorism Act of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So, when you have the willpower to prosecute, the next thing is you establish, a team that will be specially trained to investigate and look out for those ingredients that will enable you establish the offense of, terrorism, banditry, and all of that. But in this case, without the willpower, when a government's body language is that of one that tolerates all of these things, then you now begin to look for excuses. And let me take your mind back memory lane a little bit. When this Boko Haram issue started, some people, just like the militancy in the Niger Delta, and like we're having with the case of unknown gunmen now in the East, some people felt these people were fighting for the cause of Allah. These people were fighting for freedom, or that, yes, because the society neglected them. So those were the excuses by leaders of thought from that region who had neglected this set of people and sent them to Almajiri schools. This way, I think at some point they felt guilty. And so they started creating excuses and allowed it to fester. When Mohammed Yusuf was arrested, it is a notorious fact that he was killed in questionable circumstances, and it was impossible to extract evidence from him. It was also impossible to prosecute him since he's been killed anyway. And so then we hurriedly, we debated, should there be a anti-terrorism law or not? Should the police now set up what you call a counter-terrorism unit of the Nigerian police? And so one would have expected that immediately we go after the financiers. But we also started debating that. Aliu Ndume, if you remember, Senator Aliu Ndume at some point was fingered as sponsors of Boko Haram, and the matter went to court, but eventually he was discharged and acquitted. And also, when those that have been convicted in UAE were arrested. In 2015, there were correspondences between the Office of the Attorney General and the United Arab Emirates. What did we do? We kept quiet. We didn't do anything. Meanwhile, we had registered SIM card to be able to track, calls made by financiers and terrorism and the funds used. We had also introduced what you call a single treasury account and cashless economy to be able to minimize movement of money from financiers to these people. But all of that, because of the lack of the willpower to see it through, we introduced this novel and fantastic legal framework, but in the end, there is no willpower to actually drive it down. That's why we are where we are today. And so now the Attorney General has said they need to revive prosecution. And some people also are a bit skeptical. Why is the Attorney General suddenly waking up that you want to prosecute those that are financing terrorism? Like you said also, the technical know-how to actually investigate. People also are scared that it is because there's been this recent call for the resignation of the president. And so those people who had been so vociferous against this government might be fingered.
I'm sorry to have to interrupt you here. Just hold your thought there. We'll have to go on a short break. And when we come back, we'll continue on the conversation. Do stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show. Still with us is Barrister Liborous Oshoma, speaking on the federal government's claim that they will soon revive the Special Terrorism Prosecution Court. Now, Liborous, let's talk about the issue of jurisdiction. You've mentioned the Terrorism Prevention Act that may pose a challenge if they were to establish this court. Would like you to expatiate on that?
Yeah, I didn't get that question.
Well, I was talking about the issue of jurisdiction, and you mentioned the Terrorism Prevention Act 2013 that might pose a challenge. I'd love for you to, expatiate on that.
Yeah, on the issue of jurisdiction, but first and foremost, I was actually, expressing a thought before the break. And I said that quickly, that now they've been called for the president's resignation. Some have even asked him to step aside. And then all of a sudden, the Attorney General woke up talking about, yes, they want to prosecute financiers. One would also expect that they'll be transparent in investigating whoever it is that they are investigating, because the only way you can also win trust in everything you do, no matter the whipper, you also need to be transparent. But that said, in the area of jurisdiction, like the Federal High Court, like we know that, matters like this, that's why I told you that Federal High Courts already had the powers to prosecute offenses of terrorism, as far as their criminal offenses. And we know that the Federal High Court in Nigeria has one jurisdiction. And that's why in some cases, you find out that even people are arrested for federal offenses in Lagos and they're tried in Abuja. But in most cases, you find them, they're specifically tried in areas where the offenses are committed. And so, either where the offenses are committed, where the money is transferred from, or where the alleged accused persons runs his business. So, but the question, the big problem would be that of if you reside abroad, for example, and you are sponsoring terrorism in Nigeria, whether the countries of origin will have that confidence to hand you over to the Nigerian government for prosecution, knowing fully well the way our criminal justice system run here. Like the UAE, one would have expected that if we had, a watertight prosecution system, rather than prosecute these people there, because the money was actually sent for offenses in Nigeria. But they were all prosecuted in UAE and sent to jail there. And so, in countries where you have those strong laws, rather than send those accused persons or defendants to Nigeria, they would want to prosecute over there. But I do not know if, the extradition laws of these places, or we have that pact with some of these countries, to be able to extradite suspect. Look at the case, even the corruption cases. We've been back and forth with the London courts, on extraditing some of Nigerians who are allegedly committed corruption here. The big question is, because over there are ingredients that you must establish before, the system would believe that an offense had been, a prima facie case had been established against that suspect. But here, the allegation is once the Attorney General says, yes, that person is corrupt, or that person had been fingered to finance terrorism, and then we all go to town to say, yes, those people have been named. But in these other countries, where you would be thinking of extraditing these offenders, there are ingredients that they will be looking out for that you must establish. If you're unable to establish this ingredients, it becomes a problem for you. So you will likely prosecute the ones here. But the big question really is, how well have we even prosecuted the people who actually committed the act?
Right.
To even begin now to run after the financiers. It is good to run after them, but it is very technical. Like you said, we'll have to deal with the issue of jurisdiction. We also have to deal with the issue of presumption of innocence. So if we are able to deal well with those that have perpetrated the act, and then you will use that as a strong signal to those people who might be interested in wanting to be financed. We have not even done that at all. Exactly. So that's why I think this new angle of wanting to prosecute financiers might just be a smoke screen that will end nowhere.
You know, you touched on something just there about the timings in this prosecution process, and I wanted to ask you about conspiracy, because offences of conspiracy and criminal association are obvious models for preventative intervention against the planning and preparation of criminal acts. However, I'll put it to you rather than putting my opinion in there. Criminalizing conspiracies to commit a terror act or offence, even when the terrorist act of terrorism itself hasn't yet been carried out, it might raise all different types of evidentiary difficulties. What are your thoughts on that, on prosecuting people on conspiracy cases as it relates to terrorism? Because eventually, as you put it, the act itself hasn't actually been committed.
Conspiracy, it depends on conspiracy in itself. Conspiracy to commit an act or a felony, it's in itself an offense. And whether the act had been committed or not, it is the gravity that will now determine the sentence. It is the sentence also that will determine whether the act has been committed, would depend on the punishment for that act. If you conspire to commit act of terrorism, the fact that the act has not been committed will not exonerate you from that crime, because it is part of the Counter-Terrorism Act, the Terrorism Prevention Act of 2013, that those who conspire to commit, terrorism is an offense there. I think it carries about 13 or 15 years in jail. So whether the act has been committed or not, it's now the discretion of the court to say, okay, this act has not been committed, as distinct from an act that has been committed. So it's not an excuse. But for me, like I said earlier, these are not offenses that you see with, the naked eyes. These are offenses that you will need technology to establish. The ones that you see with naked eyes, we should also, channel our energy to those areas and prosecute them. This idea of rehabilitating a situation where you rehabilitate somebody who has committed terrorism, and then you now say that you want to prosecute and jail somebody who had the intention or who had conspired to commit terrorism but had not committed it. So that's where, we live in a very, emotional society. And that's where people also, doubts will be raised. How come this one that committed the act is let off the hook? The government is even spending money to rehabilitate him. But this one that just had the intention but had not committed it, how come he's being sent to jail? So if you now begin to create those divorce, you are also going to run into trouble with the society that you're trying to protect. And that's why I always, talk about the fact that the laws are laws, but you will need strong leaders to implement this law, irrespective of whose horse is God. Once you do that, it becomes very easy for everybody to know that the law is supreme according to the rule of law, as defined by the rule of law.
Still on this special terrorism courts. Now, the Attorney General had said that the government is committed to ending insecurity, and that this special terrorism court will counter the twin troubles of insurgency and insecurity. I mean, is this really what will end insurgency?
You see, I always, everything good is good for the society, but it is not enough. Look. The court we have, to create a special court, you will need to amend the Constitution. This is not a problem that, it's a problem that's already with us. So there is no time to begin to amend Constitution, amend laws to create a special court. You already have courts. Right. What we have presently is the fact that the courts are overburdened with frivolous cases, political cases, and the everyday crime. So what do? You employ more hands. Look at, by practice directions. The Lagos State government, through practice direction, because if you're going to segment the court, you will require the amendment of the Constitution. The Lagos State government, through practice, the Chief Judge of Lagos State, through practice direction, segmented the court. You have the criminal division, you have matrimonial, general civil division, you have probate, you have commercial divisions. So it enables you, if you have counter-terrorism cases, if you use practice direction to segment the Federal High Court, employ more hands, you do not need to create special courts. There are cases, there are criminal divisions in the Federal High Court where you know that once it's EFCC matters, you know the judges it will go to. So if you use the same practice direction to create and segment these courts, and then you have the willpower to actually prosecute, and not this sentiment of, yes, we are trying to create special court, or that now we are waking up to investigate, when the world had investigated and sentenced yours as far back as 2015, then what you're basically doing is just sloganeering. All these are what I call sloganeering. I had expected to see the Attorney General come out to say, or at the launching of the practice direction to segment the Federal High Court, employment of more judges, to say now, because of the burden of electoral cases, because of the burden of civil, general, and criminal cases, we now want to segment the Federal High Court. We've employed more hands in Abuja division. We have about 23 judges in Lagos division. We have 30 judges in Maiduguri division. We have 40 judges newly employed, created for the Federal High Court, strictly speaking, to deal with the case of terrorism. So once you do that, and then the Nigerian police, not just these few counter-terrorism people that you have, you also need to train men of the Nigerian police to ensure that it is not this kick-and-go approach that we already have model our policing after. It's a specially trained squad, because we're talking about financial crimes also here, where a man will, like the one that happened in UAE, it was through bureau de change. You know, you ordinarily, for the ordinary man, it will be a normal bureau de change transaction. But when this money is actually traced, you find out that it goes into the hands of some of these people who are aiding terrorism. So you need a specially trained squad to investigate that crime, because like I said investigation is part of prosecution, and if your investigation is wishy-washy, I can tell you that accused person will walk away free, smiling out of court, because of the presumption of innocence in favor of the accused persons in our constitution.
We've spoken so much about accused persons and the process for justice, trial and the like, but I wanted to ask you very briefly about victims. You know, if we take the issue of school kidnappings, for example, the first objective is to free victims from captivity, but what ways do you think the Nigerian criminal justice system can support victims of terrorism in 30 seconds? Unfortunately,
our justice system do not deal with the issue of supporting victims. Apart from giving justice, when for the victim, justice is served if those people that held them captive are put behind bars or appropriate sanctions melted out. It is the society or the government that will now think of how to rehabilitate the victim or how to compensate victims. But here, even this government and the society had not been able to protect the victim, not to talk of even rehabilitating them. That's where the big problem is. The court deals with the crime that had been committed and whether a crime actually had been committed. But for the victim, it is the state. It's an offense against the state, yes, mind you. So it is the state that should be responsible, or that is responsible.
Thank you so much, Barrister. You have been fantastic on this segment.
Thank you.